Hello everyone and welcome again to our podcast Academia. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do or follow us in SoundCloud. Today we're going to discuss the Brexit. Clearly a topic that is controversial and very actual. I will say once again that we do not express our opinions. We only present opposite views in the topics discussed. So let's go to it. Many say that one of the most important reasons for the UK wanting to leave the EU is the immigration policy adopted that allows immigrants to stay in the EU and thus entering the UK in large number. Javier, do you agree, or do you see different reasons for the UK people to be dissatisfied with the EU and thus voting yes in the leaving referendum?
Well, the immigration subject is a very controversial subject and is one of the main reasons why the Leave voters vote on the Leave campaign. But actually, it is related with something more deep. That is, the European Union threatens the UK's sovereignty. So this is an emotional argument. It's more, I think, a matter of opinion and a matter of what people believe and what people think. It's not something as rational as could be something economic, but it's a reason that they have to feel from a country, and they feel that the European Union is not respecting that, and it is actually threatening their sovereignty. This is related to patriotism, which may be dangerous, but I think it's actually a kind of good patriotism because it's not too radical. And in fact, there are some things of the European Union that actually seem to be nonsenseless. For example, regulations on the European Union have become more onerous, and some seem even ludicrous because they have too much bureaucracy. For example, tea bags cannot be recycled, so this increases a lot the costs of the tea producers, tea for the final consumer, and also limits on the power of vacuum cleaners, and some more grievous, such as the impossibility of the UK making better designed car windows for trucks in order to avoid men riding bicycles being injured. And this could not be done in the UK because this had to be a measure that needed to be done at European level, and France was opposed to it. So actually that bureaucracy of having so many different countries with so many different interests in one same organization, and that no things can be done unless they all come to an agreement, that's something that actually is a reason really strong for the UK wanting to leave the European Union.
So you see bureaucracy and loss of sovereignty as main factors for the people of UK wanting to leave the EU?
Well, there are also other factors, but I don't think that those are as important because, for example, some economic factors have been discussed, such as some money that is sent to the European Union by the UK every year that is worth about $13 billion per year. Which is more or less $300 per person in the UK. Some people argue that this number is even bigger, but they do not take into account some money that is returned from the European Union to the UK. Even though this may be a rational argument, it's an economic argument, still the leaving from the UK of the European Union would make much more grievous wounds and would not compensate this money that is spent on the European Union. So I think that this is more kind of a misleading argument, in order for some people that are not so as well informed as others to fall into voting the Brexit campaign.
Pedro, do you want to say anything about this? For example, why are the reasons presented not a problem for
yes,
UK?
Of course. First of all, hello everyone. And that argument of immigration, I think, if that is an argument to remain, because Britain receives immigrants who give a boost to the economy. In a no-deal Brexit scenario, the inflow of migrants from the European Union will fall by 80%. And this is bad in terms of demography. Many immigrants are high qualified. For example, we have doctors from Portugal that go to the UK, and there are difficulties on immigration process. Are bad for the UK because less people will want to go to the UK. They would rather go to other places, and net immigration has fallen to its lower level in the past 6 years. And also there is the problem with the Irish border and with Scotland independence that arises from the UK leaving the European Union. Also, in relation to what Javier was saying, the emotional argument of independence, as I will discuss later, I believe if the UK leaves the European Union, what will happen is that in practice they will have even less sovereignty, at least economic sovereignty. But I will talk about that later. Also, regulations on the European Union bureaucracy. I think it's quite the opposite, because European Union wants to increase free trade, and the bureaucracy is something that is not good for free trade. So the European Union tries to avoid all these things, and overall bureaucracy in the systems actually is lower when some country is within the EU, mainly in the trade with other countries, obviously. And when you are talking about the different economic interests, that's true, but that will also happen even when the UK is not in the European Union. And if it is not in the European Union, it has not a word on what is done within the European Union. And that will not happen if the UK remains. And that's my point.
Continuing, let's break down the political and economical consequences of the Brexit. Will the negative impact be more damaging than the benefits, Pedro?
I think it will. There will be terrible economic consequences. Brexit isn't done completely yet, but there is some damage already. Companies are leaving the UK to other European countries to have access to European markets. Many banks are transferring money to other places, such as Frankfurt. According to Bloomberg, the Deutsche Bank had transferred 400 billion euros, the JP Morgan to 200 billion, and the Goldman Sachs 60 billion. So it's quite a lot of money. And the estimates of potential GDP, according to the same site, show that it is much lower with Brexit than if there was no Brexit. And business trade, I think in a free market, a bigger market within the European Union, we gain an efficiency, and we have more access to resources. The bigger market allows for big competition, which will maximize the surplus overall, and the ones who will be successful will be the ones who do more benefits to the others. And you may ask if it is good for small business, and that is one that it seems to be a problem, but I think it isn't so much, because for the prosperous one and the most efficient, there is a big credit market, if they are in the European Union than if they are not. The United Kingdom, of course, and the less credit markets, the interest rates to pay will be higher. There will be more risk for investors, and so I think it is not good for the prosperous small businesses. Also, and move from free trade to the World Trade Organization agreements worries many interests. We have the example of Darren Larvin, that exports cheese, butter, and other things, and sells most products overseas, and believes, according to Financial Times, that the price of its exports may double if trade with Canada shifts to WTO agreements. And Canada is not even in the EU, so imagine
the consequences for the UK.
Imagine other countries. In the globalized world, Britain either becomes isolated, which means less trade, and I think it's a bad idea, because firms leave the European Union, consumers have less choice of products, and demand for things, there will be demand for things the British market alone can support. Price will increase. It's true that in some ways small firms are protected, but the less efficient ones. Unemployment will increase. These firms also need a market and they need to sell products. And
because the British products, the British products will suffer tariffs and protection measures from the the EU.
And British people must have money to buy the products. Plus, small firms also import things, so it isn't necessarily good Brexit for the smaller ones. And in the end, there is other options. They can follow rules from a powerful partner, the USA or the European Union itself. So, but if the United Kingdom is in the European Union, it has a word to say on how things are done. And with the USA, it has not so much. And so Brexit, in terms of independence, I think it doesn't bring independence. In the Brexit scenarios, we have the no deal, and firms leave the EU. Firms like the UK. Firms like Nissan warned on hard Brexit, and many people and smaller firms depend on Nissan, which is an essential factory. 80% reduction in flow from migrants. Then we have another styles, for example, the Canada-style free trade deal. There will be problems with the Irish border still. The UK will need to accept some things it's voted against while Brexit. And the Norway style, in practice, is in the European Union, but it doesn't have a word to say. So I think
it's even worse. You are in the EU, but you have no.
It's even worse. No one of these options is good for the UK. And there will be crises in the short term in case of no deal. There are expected 6-day queues into Dover, according to Financial Times, and possible shortage of food, medicine and water will happen. And several articles and a point that government is preparing and people are preparing to say things preparing Brexit. And so I think the economic consequences will be very bad.
What do you think that will happen in terms of UK economy after the Brexit? Javier, certainly you have something to say about this, and something to say about the major benefits of the Brexit, and point out some of the negative outcomes also.
Well, Pedro has talked a lot about the economic disaster and economic consequences about Brexit to the UK, but actually we're not being clear at all, because we are talking about different things, so we think that we are talking in the same language, but we aren't. Actually, there are many types of Brexit that are possible. For example, there's a hard Brexit, we could call it like that. It is a no-deal Brexit, where all those consequences of firms leaving the UK, products not arriving to the UK borders, things like that will happen. And I think because of that, a no-deal scenario is not a possible scenario, it's an unrealistic scenario. But actually there are other possibilities, such as the UK being something like Canada, like Pedro said. And what he said that was the main problem was immigration. But actually, what the problem is not that UK does not want immigration, or even that they want less immigration. The problem is that they say that they have unregulated immigration. Anybody that enters the European Union will have the possibility to go into the UK. They need to control that, because if not, so many people without even being checked can enter the UK. The problem is we have 80% of the immigration that was happening some time ago into the UK was unqualified. So they cannot stand that much cheap work labor, because they have not an economic model that is based on that. So what they actually want to do is they want to regulate that immigration. They do not want to make part of the Schengen area. But that's the main concern. They do not want to go outside the European Union in terms of free trade. That's not the main concern of them. That's the main concern is the bureaucracy. That also Pedro said that in the European Union there's more efficiency, but actually there are some regulations that are really arguable, because they seem more like protectionist regulations more than actually some good regulations that mean for people to have good quality products. Some of those regulations are just means of protectionism, and that causes less efficiency. Also, what they want, what Pedro said, also another problem was that UK would have also some differences between different parts of the country, and they would still argue about the policies that they would have to take. The problem is, the European Union has some policies and acts like as if it were a country. So it has a euro, a single monetary currency, which is a thing that isn't well thought at all, because you cannot have countries like Greece, Spain, together with Germany having the same currency, and that's not the case of the UK. But still, there's some influence of the euro in the currency of England that affects a lot. The thing is, if the European Union was a country, then Germany, they would have the same currency, but Germany would be constantly sending money to other countries in order for them to grow economically, because if not, it's unsustainable, that situation. That's not the case that you have in the European Union. In the European Union, each country cares for itself. There's not a common interest in that sense. There's a common interest in the measure that is an interest that is individual for each country. So it's not well seen in Germany that German governments start sending a lot of money to poor countries such as Greece, Spain, Portugal, and those southern European countries. Also, there's a thing that you've mentioned, Pedro, if I'm not bad. The European Union, in certain parts, is against bureaucracy. But actually, the European Union is a really assembled model that it cannot change due to the radical reforms to be done. In order for those radical reforms, a lot of countries with different interests have to agree with those reforms, and those reforms are not good for everybody, as all reforms are. So the problem here is that the European Union does not stand for radical reforms or for radical changes. Another problem that Pedro said was the possibility of, if I'm not wrong, you correct me, that Scotland could eventually leave the UK,
because many Scottish want to remain in the UK, and it's a region. In the European Union, it's a region that supports no Brexit.
Yeah, and in fact, the majority of Scotland has voted to remain in the referendum. But what an independent Scotland would actually mean? An independent Scotland in the European Union would have serious non-tariff barriers to England, which is their largest market for about 70% of their exports. Also, if they kept the pound as currency, they wouldn't be controlling it. London would. Also, they wouldn't probably be granted their share of the UK budget rebate, which is a rebate of that money that is sent by the UK to the European Union all years, and a part of it is rebated to the UK. They wouldn't probably have the power to negotiate that rebate to remain. Also, if they try to get, once the UK leaves the European Union, if they got independent and tried to get in the European Union, they would probably have to invoke the Article 49, by which they need to have budget deficit of less than 3% of GDP. Actually, that deficit is of 8%. This would mean that they would need to implement drastic austerity policies and cutting on spending and raising taxes, such as things that have been done in countries such as Greece and Spain, which are in a similar position of deficit of GDP.
Mm-hmm. Do you say with that Scotland is dependent on England?
Yeah, I think so, and I think that they wouldn't be able, because if politicians in Scotland left the UK and went to the European Union applying all those dramatic policies, I know they would be seen as evil because they would have made Scotland go into poverty. It is also improbable that Northern Ireland would seek to join the Republic of Ireland because the Irish unity post-Brexit is supported by just 21% of Northern Ireland population. So I think that this problem is not also in the scope of the Brexit.
In terms of political situation within the UK, do you think that Conservatives have the conditions to make the Brexit happen? Or do you think that should be negotiated a second time? Generally, do you find the deal satisfying, Pedro?
Well, there are some things I want to talk about. It's also related to the question, but the immigration problem that Britain doesn't want to be on the Schengen space, I think it's a problem. But there are major problems that arrive with Brexit. Also, the fact that Britain has a single currency, the single currency in the European Union doesn't affect the pound. And if Britain leaves the European Union, it will affect the euro will affect the pound, as affects the dollar, as affects the other currencies. And the German control of Europe, I think Britain can solve it just by leaving the European Union. And also the Scotland independence issues. I think it will be bad for Scotland, for the reasons Javier had developed, but it's worth remembering that Scotland voted controversial referendum, and results weren't not at all clear, and this issue of Brexit may cause another referendum in Scotland, and the leave of Scotland from the European Union, the United Kingdom, and this will be bad. Also, the question you mentioned, I think we have several political options. In the first referendum, people generally were misinformed. They didn't know what they know today, and they voted for a general thing, for an idea,
that was sold by Conservatives.
Exactly. And by other people, and unreal Brexit without concrete measures. And what should have been done probably was just like establishing two referendums from the beginning. The first for negotiating, the second on the deal. But you may ask, what is the option now? Well, we have the second referendum option, and in fact the first one had its legitimacy. And we shouldn't reverse things because they had the wrong result. It's true. However, the second referendum is possible, and people will have a more conscious vote. More conscious vote. Also, the following blindly the Brexit also opens another thing which is which is bad, which is that the results of the first referendum is a serious precedent, which is that we can go back in bad decisions, and I think that is not good also. And the European Union would have to give a second chance to the UK to remain, of course. Also, there is the hypothesis of general elections, but there were elections soon. And but what is most important is to stop the clock and stop the damage Brexit is already doing in the country.
And coming to a decision.
Exactly. So time will bring more information and will be good for political decision.
Javier, just to summarize, do you want to say last consideration about your position?
Well, I think Brexit is nice as an idea, but I think it has been horribly planned, and it is actually a thing that has been created and it's been improvised on the walk. So actually, they haven't made a real and a conscious Brexit proposal. They haven't done that, and they are facing problems. That's the thing that they are now. And now they do not. They didn't have a clear path to follow. And once they've done this path that wasn't clear, and Theresa May deal has been rejected, there's only two options: or a no deal, which I think that is impossible and improbable, and also it would be really contested by people, or a second referendum that I think that is the most reasonable option, that is to seek if people still, with all the information that has been added, still believe in Brexit and still want Brexit, and because of that, if they still want Brexit, then a serious path and a serious objective, with all things being planned carefully, should be done, and no things like the ones that we have seen and we have been seeing these last 2 years should be done in the future, in order to prevent also this damage of uncertainty in the economic environment.
So thank you all for listening. Please follow us in Facebook, Academia Podcast in Facebook. See you soon.